Attendance this morning at this press conference, which has been called to provide an update on Cabinet's decision and the latest developments with respect to the cruise berthing facility. On the head table this morning, I would like to introduce Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands and Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture, and Honorable Moses Kekernel, Deputy Premier and Minister for District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Would also like to acknowledge Mrs. Rosa Harris, Director of Tourism, and Mrs. Onisha Richards, Deputy Director of Tourism. The subject of this cruise berthing facility is one of the most topical issues being talked about within our community at this time. I know we're all anxious to hear the news, so without further ado, I would like to invite the Honorable Premier to bring his remarks. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out so early to this press conference. As Mr. Bowden said, I want to share with you all some exciting news concerning the cruise berthing facility project. I'm pleased to confirm that yesterday, Cabinet formally approved the cruise berthing facility recommendations regarding project delivery, so the project can now progress to the next stage. In my address to the Chamber of Commerce in late September, I outlined what some of the next stage would comprise, and the Deputy Premier will go through this in some detail when he speaks following me. This government is very aware that our natural environment is integral to the viability of our tourism product. As I've said several times before, we are committed to ensuring that any berthing facility built under our watch will be done carefully and responsibly to cause the least possible environmental impact. But as I also stated at the Chamber luncheon, we realize that we have spent 40 years building an important cruise tourism economic driver, and we are duty-bound to ensure that we do not sit still and allow it to move to Cuba or other destinations in the region. We have a clear understanding from the cruise ship companies that over time, as they continue to move to larger ships, fewer cruise passengers will visit Grand Cayman, as the larger ships will not stop here unless there is a berthing facility. As we announced yesterday in a statement by the Deputy Premier, the two largest cruise lines, the companies have clearly indicated that they will not tender the Oasis-class ships. This administration was elected by the people of the Cayman Islands to deliver on our campaign pledges, and most of them are very carefully set out in our manifesto. One of these was to responsibly build a cruise berthing facility in the Georgetown Harbor that would help ensure the country's economic success, including ensuring that existing local jobs that cater to and depend on cruise tourism are kept intact and retained into the future. These include hundreds of Caymanian tour and taxi operators, as well as employees of Georgetown merchants and restaurants, and indeed employees of businesses of all sizes across Grand Cayman that benefit from cruise tourism. But in addition to protecting our important cruise tourism business, enhancing key port infrastructure, securing jobs today, and creating new jobs in the future, this project will also serve as a needed economic boost. According to the full PricewaterhouseCoopers report, the anticipated positive economic impact from capital expenditure during the construction of the cruise and enhanced cargo berthing facility over a 3-year period is estimated to be at least $156 million. The outline business case estimates that about 500 jobs would be made available during construction, as the project would require administrative staff, laborers, divers, skilled tradesmen, project management, engineers, foremen and operators, among other positions. This will mean real, tangible opportunities for Caymanian businesses, professionals and tradespeople to be involved in this historic and economically important project. At the end of construction, the port would have been built mainly by Caymanians, for Caymanians, and will be owned by Caymanians. The large nature of this project is such that local businesses will also benefit, seeing an increase in sales and revenues. Insofar as local labor is not available, There will be a need for guest workers who would also contribute to the economy for the time that they are in Cayman. They will need places to rent. They will buy food and goods from grocery stores, restaurants, and local merchants. Once the facility is up and running, the increased economic impact is expected to continue, adding about $245 million to our GDP, as well as employment for about 1,000 people over the next 20 years, assuming at least a 1% growth in cruise visitors. Net benefits increase to a potential $1.2 billion if cruise visitors grow by at least 3% per annum. This project will also give entrepreneurs an opportunity to develop new tours and attractions for the increase in visitors. And because of the length of time it will take to complete the project, they have a 3-year lead time to get ready. And I'm certain that they will come forward. Of course, all of this assumes that we will be able to pass all the hurdles and tick all of the boxes as we move forward with consideration around financing and mitigating the environmental impact of the project. I am hopeful that we will be successful in getting to the construction stage because I am convinced of the long-term benefits of this project for Cayman and Caymanians. But I assure all that we will get there only by following due process. This is the approach we have taken with all of our infrastructure projects: the airport, the landfill, revitalization of Georgetown, and yes, the cruise and cargo port. In everything we do, in every project, we are shepherding along. We are doing so methodically, using best practice methods, and at all times being open and transparent. This country has never before had a government this open with its projects and willing to accept challenge and consider options where practical. But that is expected of us as a progressive government. Openness, transparency, coupled with accountability, have always been our modus operandi. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who has contributed to the conversation on cruise berthing. Those who have written letters, spoken to us in person, in favor or against, wrote on blogs, marched in protest, or who perhaps quietly encouraged or patted us on the back for being brave enough to take this forward in the transparent fashion that we have. In the end, a government must make decisions, but it is important to ensure that all voices are heard, and this we have done. I can assure the country that this administration, which I have the honor and privilege to lead, continues and is proud to be able to say we get things done. But we are also a government that thinks carefully and seeks to act with the long-term benefit of our country and people always uppermost in mind. I invite all to compare this government and where we are today with any previous government that has sought to build cruise piers but failed, and in the end cost the country millions of dollars. Yes, I believe we are a government that gets things done, but we get them done by following due process and being open and honest with the Caymanian people. The process with respect to this project is not concluded. It merely continues to the next stage. And as I have said before, there will be no dredges in Georgetown Harbor tomorrow, next week, or next month. Instead, we will proceed carefully to ensure the minimum environmental impact, as well as discussing with the cruise lines their participation in the financing, so as to ensure the success of the project, as well as to guarantee the long-term viability and benefit of the industry to local people and businesses. I thank you for your attention and would now turn the briefing over to the Deputy Premier and Minister for Tourism, who will provide a bit more detail about the project.
Thank you, Premier, and good morning to everyone that's here. As the Premier has said, this media briefing has been called to share the news that Cabinet has formally approved the cruise berthing facility recommendations, allowing the project to move to the next stage. This decision was not taken lightly and has involved hours of deliberation. 10 reports from some of the world's foremost experts in their respective fields have been reviewed and discussed. Several major factors have been taken into account in weighing the benefits to the country. We are all aware that successive governments have wrestled with the provision of a cruise berthing facility, and several million dollars have been spent with little to nothing to show for it. Today, that has changed because all the reports, studies, and intellectual property gathered under this PPM-led administration belong to the people of the Cayman Islands. Furthermore, all of the reports have been released for public review. The cruise berthing facility is the largest government infrastructure project ever to be considered for our islands. And I'm proud that the procurement decisions associated to this project have followed international best practice. Having campaigned on the premise of a berthing facility, this government could conceivably say that we have a mandate from the people of the Cayman Islands to deliver on that pledge. Rather than take that as a hard and uncompromising line, we adopted a best practice approach and sought to gather as much data, information, and statistics as possible to make an informed decision. In 2013, PricewaterhouseCoopers, a world-recognized and respected firm, was contracted by government to develop a business case for the berthing facility. PwC was tasked to assess the project and provide an independent opinion of the socioeconomic benefits and the environmental risks. The business case identified that 2 piers would be most suited to our needs, and recommendations included having the cruise lines involved in the finance model. The next big piece of work was the environmental impact assessment, which confirmed early on that the process that the cruise pier development would not impact 7 Mile Beach. PwC then updated the original business case with the environmental impact assessment's findings and provided a cost-benefit analysis for the overall project. In other words, the calculations were done to quantify the economic value and also place a dollar figure on the impact to the environment so that an assessment could be made of the economic benefits the piers could bring to the country. Shortly after, government also received the 2014-15 Business Research and Economics Advisors Report that had been commissioned to provide data on cruise passenger volumes and their spending patterns in Grand Cayman. The BRIA report is based on figures from 2014, allowing comparisons to be made virtually in real time. In September 2015, PwC delivered their economic assessment of the project to government. This was presented as an addendum to the OBC outlining the findings of the EIA and a supplementary report which included their assessment of the BRIA report. In their final analysis, PwC came to the conclusion that the estimated economic benefits of the cruise berthing facility exceeded the environmental costs associated with the project. I have taken the time to lay out these various steps to illustrate the volume and scope of information that has been scrutinized, analyzed, and provided to government so that the very best decision for the future of these islands could be made. Having carefully considered this information, Cabinet has approved this project proceeding to the next stage, and we are committed to providing a facility for our islands that will deliver the greatest economic benefit and the least environmental impact. While there's much to be proud of with respect to the process that has been followed, it has been disconcerting to see this project polarizing our community. This is somewhat surprising, considering a berthing facility has been on the cards for development in Georgetown Harbor for over a decade. I can only surmise that some of the trauma is due to the realization that we are a government that gets things done. And when we say we're going to do something, something happens. Even with the studies, statistics, and feedback from the cruise lines themselves confirming the need for these piers, this has not been an easy decision for government. We are fully aware that our tourism product is supported by the natural beauty of our environment. Therefore, it bears repeating that we remain committed to identifying the best possible option that will deliver the most economic benefit with the least environmental harm. I hope that the supporters and opposers to this project will be somewhat assured to hear that government is reviewing the proposed designs to see how we can achieve even less environmental impact. Included in this consideration is moving the piers to deeper water, which would minimize the dredging. We cannot lose sight of the fact that cruise tourism contributes 24% of our island's GDP. And of the 2 million tourists who visit our shores annually, the vast majority, some 1.6 million of them, arrived last year by sea. Grand Cayman is operating in a fiercely competitive regional and global marketplace. And the only hope we have of maintaining and growing our market share is by providing infrastructure which is on par or better than our competitors. This is why this government has not shied away from tackling this project head on. We're taking the necessary action to lay a solid foundation that will support the economic and social growth of our country well into the future. At the functional level, cruise tourism in our islands is made up of a growing number of Caymanians who rely on this industry for their livelihoods. They're not nameless, faceless statistics. They are the taxi drivers, the tour operators, the retailers, the restaurateurs, the tours, the attractions, and a host of other service providers that work very hard to support this business. In light of the decision to move forward, the Ministry of Tourism is speaking with cruise lines to identify a funding model that will deliver the best possible outcome for the country while ensuring that the piers are owned by the people of the Cayman Islands. Assuming the ministry is successful in securing agreements with the cruise lines, we would realistically expect passenger volumes to be maintained and increased. This would effectively allow the project to continue on to its next phase of development, which will be the approval from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the issuing of tenders for the design-build aspects. Looking to the future, I am confident that this decision will grow our business environment, foster economic development, bring increased business opportunities, create jobs as Premier has outlined, and over the longer term, it will enhance and sustain the cruise tourism industry for the Cayman Islands. On behalf of the government, I'd like to say thank you to our consultants, our stakeholders and partners, members of the public, and all who have contributed to getting us to this point. By moving forward, we are doing what is right for this country and securing opportunity for generations to come. Thank you all.
Thank you, Minister. Before I open the floor for questions, I would like to advise that we have another press conference immediately after, so we may have limited time. But without further ado, I'd like to take the first question from the floor.
Morning, gentlemen. Wendy from Cayman News Service. I'm just going to ask one question because I know everybody's going to be keen, and there's time at the end. I'll ask more. But are you willing to say whether it was a unanimous decision in Cabinet, and if it was not unanimous, which minister didn't support it?
Wendy, let me say a little bit about how the process of decision-making occurs. There is no vote in Cabinet. It's a convention. It's not something that we invented. So there's no vote in Cabinet. We have a vigorous caucus, one that usually leaves me completely wiped out by the end of the evening on Monday. There are no yes men or women in this administration. Sometimes I wish there were a couple. But this is a matter that we've debated up and down. There have been differing views, there have been reservations, there have been concerns. But I'm happy to say, by the time we concluded caucus on this matter, everyone around the table agreed for the matter to move forward.
Next question.
Just wondering, the business case which you referred to had a kind of bandwidth of economic impacts, a fairly wide span of bandwidth, but I think the upside was around about $400 million potentially in their most concrete estimates. Just wondered if you'd compared that to other public sector investment opportunities. I mean, is a potential $200 million investment, is that a good return for that money, do you think? And could the money be spent elsewhere? Have you looked at that?
Thank you very much for that question. It's an excellent question, and I'll take a little bit extra time to answer it. The decision that had to be made with the peers, the cruise berthing, is we as a country, are we going to continue to take advantage of this as part of a pillar of our economy? And if we are going to do that, then we need to upgrade our infrastructure and understand how we can best participate in this growth market. By taking advantage of that, what we wanted to do was carve out the highest potential for the arriving passengers to be the ones that would spend the most money at a destination. So some of the things that were looked at, James, was to find out which ships brought the highest spend, what was the need for those ships, what were the attractions that people liked, what were the sensitivities to those. And in that, one of the areas that we were very weak on was actually the piers themselves. As you can see from indications from the cruise lines at the highest level of management there, that they don't berth some of the larger vessels, and the other ones that are coming are not going to be tendered. They don't tender, I should have said. So when we looked at the investment, we had a couple things that we wanted to make sure of. Number one, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we would not be able to find a way to pay for these piers, because the model that is in the outline business case calls for the country to own the piers, and it will be managed and operated by the Port Authority of the Cayman Islands. In doing that, we believe that we must secure the partnership of the cruise lines themselves, which would guarantee the throughput of people, which allows us to pay for the piers. The modeling that we're endeavoring on now is to find out how we do this without upland development, which we've committed to, because we want the revitalization of Georgetown to capitalize on the piers as we move people into Georgetown. And we look at this as the total package that we talked about, with the infrastructure of the airport coming online, the improvement of cruise berthing facilities, the improvement of pedestrianizing Georgetown and creating opportunity in Georgetown. So I believe that the specific answer to your question is that we're approaching this in a way that we're mitigating the risk that the country would have of not having the ability to pay for it. We're making sure it becomes an asset of the country itself, and we are putting ourselves in a position of growth that gives opportunity for job creation and gives opportunity for entrepreneurs and Caymanians to be involved in a growing industry. If you just look at the difference between the year we were elected, when we did 1.25 million visitors, and this last year when we did 1.6, and see the effect that that had on businesses.
Thank you,
Maybe
Minister.
a little bit too long of an answer for you, but sorry.
And this may be a question for the Premier, what stage do you expect this project to be at by the next election? Do you think it will have reached the point where it's irreversible if a change of government with a different idea about this whole thing?
Well, I hope that's the case. But again, that depends on how we get on with the other areas that we have to deal with. The whole relook at the design with a view to mitigating as far as possible the environmental impact. That's going to take some time. The discussions with the FCO are going to really be, the outcome of those are really going to be predicated on how well we are able to present the case that this is essentially a self-financing project and not something that is going to require the use of current revenues to fund. And that again is predicated, in turn, is predicated on how well we get on with the financing structure that we're trying to put in place with the cruise lines. So, you know, we're still a long ways away from saying that this project is a go, a point I've made more than once. But we do believe we have all of the elements to make it happen. But I would expect in the next, I think, 18, 19 months that we have, we should be able to get to a point where those issues are resolved one way or the other.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Honorable Mayor. Next question.
Mine may seem a little simplistic. The question being, yes, we're doing some work on the airport, but why not extend the runway as has come up many times in the past? So we're putting our eggs in the cruise ship basket as opposed to the stay-over visitor. Why one instead of the other?
Well, I'm sure the Deputy Premier wants to get in on this question, but it's not a case of one or the other. The airport is being redeveloped in phases, based principally on the prioritization that has taken place about what are the most critical areas that need improvement, and based on the government's ability to pay for the project.
Yeah, I'd like to.
So it's not a case of one or the other. It's a question of timing.
I'd like to add to that. When you think of where we are with our arrivals, and we have an airport that is handling 1 million people a year. It was built for 500,000 people. When we got elected, there had been talk about doing something at that airport for the last 12 years, and nothing had been done. Our challenge was to protect our industry and to provide for our friends and family that come through that airport. So we had to look at what funds were available, and you know, everything is fluid because at that time some of the restrictions that we had on borrowing are starting to be lifted, and our economy is much stronger now than it was at that time. But we couldn't take the chance of not addressing the immediate problem, which was creating a proper arrival and departure experience for especially our guests and the people of this country. So we had to move as quickly as we could to address that need. Now, if you look at the business case, it clearly outlines that there are specific times of when in the business case is identified we would look at expanding the airport and the timeline for that, and also the other topic of jet bridges is identified in the business case as well under the guidelines we have and the funds we had available. So I can tell you that we are pressing as fast as we can to try to make the experience itself, which is the most important right now for getting almost 400,000 tourists in and out on a yearly basis.
Thank you, Minister. Next question.
I guess this is a question for the Premier. Do you anticipate being in a position to talk with the FC officials in November, December when you head off to London?
I'm sure it'll be inevitable that I'll have to talk to them. We usually have a bilateral with the minister, and during that discussion, I'm sure we'll have some discussions about it. Quite where we'll be in terms of the process by then, I'm not sure. Maybe the Deputy Premier can speak more to that. But this is end of October, and it's end of November I go off, so we essentially have a month.
So not sure that you'll have much more detail to present in those talks.
I wouldn't expect that we'd be in a position to say, here's the deal.
The Georgetown revitalization plan and the port, when the consultants spoke with people at a public meeting, I think about a week ago or so, they weren't able to factor in the port in their concept for Georgetown because they said they didn't have that information. How are you working to ensure that this port plan, the airport plan, and the central Georgetown revitalization fully mesh together?
Well, from the airport standpoint, one of the integrating factors is the road network. And I can confirm to you that the airport management is meeting with the National Road Authority to see the need for the flow into that airport. Under the cruise berthing, the pedestrianization and the actual flow of passengers as they come off of the vessel is, if you think of a snapshot overview and you identify where they come off the vessel and how they get distributed into the community. The importance of the proper distribution is that is the door to the country. So you want to make sure they can get to West Bay easily, that they get 7 Mile Beach easily, that they can get to East End easily, Pedro, and that was a central part of making sure the distribution in the acreage that is there now and some that will be created. Then you move that into coordinating with the revitalization aspect of it. So we haven't been at the point to be able to sit down other than, yes, we want to talk, and yes, we need to mesh this, and yes, it is our vision to have all three of these coming in, and that has certainly been a talk. But to be able to give you specifics this morning, I can't do that, Ben.
The last administration's plan for the port did have massive upland development, and you've made it clear you're not going that way. Now, some of the opponents of what you're doing will say, listen, the Deputy Premier's name is Kirkconnell. The Kirkconnells own a large number of the businesses in Georgetown who stand to benefit from an influx of cruise visitors. How much of a factor was that family connection in any decision to advance this so quickly?
Well, I love my family, but I don't own any shares in any of their businesses in Georgetown. So I think that we have looked at this in as transparent way as we possibly can. And I say that it has never been so public, all of the information, sometimes to the point where maybe if we had a little bit more time to talk or negotiate before it was released to the public, we would have been able to bring an outcome maybe in a little different way. But the revitalization of Georgetown, clearly understand this, that the Kirkconnell family in looking at the road that is right next to the sea, right, the front road, the revitalization creates value into Georgetown. And the tremendous number of Caymanian families that are going to benefit from making the land value as you move into Georgetown is far greater than, take the family name out of it, but look at the other major players that own on Front Street and realize that now what we're doing is creating more customers and more people that go into central Georgetown and have the opportunity to enjoy some of the cultural experiences. One of the most popular tours that are coming out now for the cruise and for stayover is local restaurant tours, a cultural experience of our cuisine. So these are the type of things that you're creating opportunity for.
Thank you, Minister. Next question. Joe.
Good morning, Reshma Raghunath, Cayman reporter. You mentioned that the design will now incorporate further out deep water design. Can you tell us how expensive this will be and how long the design process is going to take?
Very good question. The pilings, the deepest piling that is there now in the design that Baird put forward is in 50 to 55 feet of water. We have gone back to Baird as the engineers and asked them to look at moving the pier into deeper water with the outermost piling actually being in as much as 90 feet of water. So you can realize that gives some opportunity to moving it away and changing the dredge pocket itself. We have done that already with Beard. That request has been made for them to look at this from an engineering standpoint. We will review that as quickly as possible. Once we get that, it'll come to caucus, and we will sit and see the opportunity. That again, the strength, to Wendy's question about how our members participate, the strength of our caucus is that each individual brings a strength and looks at, when we say that we're trying to create the maximum economic benefit with the least environmental impact, we have strengths that help us say, you can tweak this a little bit different, or we can look at this, and we've given that commitment. So we expect to have an indication from those designs in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We are moving very quickly on trying to see next steps, and obviously these will work in parallel with the cruise lines and the financing model as well.
But do you have a dollar figure that you can share with us?
The outline business case, which is a public document, identified $156 million. Now, in terms of reference of how this design was done, it was done on value for dollar. So that's why you see the design boldly put into the most efficient way of building these piers and getting the result that you needed. And obviously it's less expensive to build them in 55 feet of water than it is in 85 or 90 feet of water. So the commitment from the government is that we had a number of $156 million. It may very well be that when we look at more money, right, because of the ability to save and move the dredge pocket to have less environmental impact, we are committed to doing that. So I can't tell you how much that exact number would be, but I can tell you that the feeling from the government is that we would look at that number as something that we are very much able and willing to accept to try to minimize the environmental impact.
So for all intents and purposes, this project is going forward. But over the past couple of days, we've had a lot of complaints about employment, work permits, stuff like that. Are you considering integrating into that project a specific local content figure for employment?
We do that now.
Yeah. Good. We do
That's a practice that we're actually doing now with some of the new projects that have come online. The developers give commitments of the number of Caymanians that will participate in that, and we would certainly expect to do that with this project.
Any idea of the content figure that you're looking at?
I think we're a little bit, let us get a little bit closer to see the skill sets that are actually, there are certain jobs that you would have a higher percentage of Caymanians available with the skill sets, and I think we would do it by the different types of skill sets that are needed.
Hey guys, just two quick ones. The first one would be about the upland development stuff. If they came back to you and said, well, we can give you, this participation and partnership for funding, but you're going to have to budge on that. Is that something that you guys are willing to budge on, upland development, to make a deal happen? Second question, how married to the design is it? Is it a concept of this same two-finger pier traced on tracing paper and moved out to the 80, 90-foot mark for pilings? Or could the design be like something that we've seen proposed by other engineering people, or something that we haven't even seen at this point? How set in stone is this design elements of the pier?
So our next step will be, as has been explained, to make sure that the cruise lines participate in the success of this project. If the cruise lines look at this, they will give a very clear indication of what they are prepared to have as the best way to get their guests ashore. and they will have input into whether it is moved into 85, 90 feet of water. They will have input of what is acceptable. And let us remember, one of the strengths of having the partnership is that they are the companies that build more piers than anybody globally. So we would want to tread on their expertise and have that available as we go forward. Married to the design that was there, I reiterate again that Baird was bold enough to make a design and come up with a figure on it that was a starting point. I don't think that it was ever intended that that design that they produced and put out was the final drawing or design. It has always been looking at it and moving it deeper, change the degrees of what we could accomplish.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but that's all the time we have. So on behalf of the Premier and Deputy Premier, thank you for your attendance. Members of the media, we have some further explanation of PwC's cost-benefit analysis. So if you just see the PR manager for the ministry on the way out, she will pass that to you. Thank you again for coming, and we wish you a very pleasant day.